a forgotten ship cast aside by everyone, until a human mechanic restores it into the most powerful vessel. Ships of all shapes and sizes came and went, each with its own purpose, its own crew, its own story. But tucked away in a quiet corner of Dock 7 was a ship that seemed to belong to neither the present nor the future. Its hull was dull and scratched, paint peeling like old paper, and rust patches dotted its surface. The name, once proudly displayed in polished letters, was now barely visible under the grime. The ship had a reputation, though not a good one. Workers whispered about it as if speaking its name could summon misfortune. They called it the Forsaken, though nobody remembered who had given it that name. Some said it had been a cargo ship, others claimed it had been part of the old trade fleet that connected distant planets decades ago. No one knew the truth anymore, and no one seemed to care. The Forsaken sat alone, chained loosely to the dock, almost as if it had been left there to wait for something that would never come. Its windows were coated in dust, and the lights inside flickered occasionally like weak heartbeats. The engines had long gone cold, and the control panels were dark, screens cracked, buttons missing. For anyone looking for a ship ready to fly, it was invisible. Yet for those who passed by, it seemed almost alive, like it was quietly watching the world move without it. Some nights, when the spaceport was quieter, the ship's hull reflected the dim starlight, making it look like a shadow waiting for something that would never return. The story of how the Forsaken came to be here was mostly forgotten, though fragments of it remained in the memories of the few who had once seen it in action. Many years ago, it had been a symbol of hope for a small fleet of traders. Its first captain had been proud and careful, respected by his crew for his fairness and skill. The ship had carried rare goods from planet to planet, its cargo hold often full of treasures that other ships could not transport. For a time, it had been the fastest and most reliable ship on the routes it served. People had talked about it with admiration, telling stories of its near-miraculous escapes from storms in space or pirate attacks. It had been, for a brief shining moment, legendary. But then came the incident that no one in the spaceport wanted to discuss. One mission had gone terribly wrong, though the details were fuzzy. Some said it was a navigation error, others whispered about a mechanical failure no one had foreseen. Whatever the cause, the ship's crew had been forced to abandon it during a dangerous situation. The Forsaken had drifted to the edge of the trade lanes, helpless and alone, until it was finally towed to Dock 7 by the authorities. After that, the crew never returned. Some had resigned to retirement, others had joined new fleets, leaving the ship to its fate. Over the years, rumors twisted the story into a tale of failure and danger. Young mechanics and dock workers grew up hearing warnings about the ship. It was old, they were told. It was cursed, they joked. It was useless, everyone agreed. Inside the ship, the silence was nearly absolute. The air was thick with dust, and the faint smell of oil and burnt metal lingered. Occasionally, the ventilation system coughed to life, sending a shiver through the corridors, but it never lasted long. Control rooms that once buzzed with activity were now frozen in time. Charts and logs, yellowed with age, remained where they had been left. Chairs were tilted awkwardly, panels left open like the hands of a clock stuck at a forgotten hour. Even small details hinted at the life the ship had once carried, the scratches on the walls from hurried steps, the fingerprints left behind in a hurry, the faint stains on the floor where crew had spilled meals long ago. Everything was still, yet the ship seemed to remember. It was as if it held memories of the people who had trusted it, even as they had abandoned it. Outside, the dock workers mostly ignored the Forsaken. They were busy with modern ships, new models that gleamed under the spaceport lights, equipped with technology that made older vessels look like antiques. Some laughed at the ship, imagining the misfortunes that might happen if anyone dared to climb aboard. They would tell stories about the strange noises the ship made at night, though no one could remember hearing them themselves. Children who snuck into the dock sometimes left small gifts near the ship, pieces of scrap metal, old tools, even drawings, though no one knew why. Maybe they saw it as lonely. Maybe they imagined it was waiting for someone who could see its worth. On one quiet evening, the spaceport seemed to exhale, the noise fading as the sun of the nearby star began to set. The colors of twilight bathed the dock in oranges and purples, reflecting off the sleek hulls of ships leaving for distant planets. The Forsaken, in contrast, seemed to absorb the fading light, its surface dull and lifeless. A gentle wind rattled loose panels and caused the chain securing it to the dock to clink softly. For a moment, the ship seemed almost human, silent, patient, forgotten, yet somehow aware of everything happening around it. Inside, small movements hinted at its potential. The emergency lights, long thought dead, flickered for a second, casting weak shadows down the empty corridors. A sensor panel that had been dusty and cracked displayed a faint green pulse before dimming again. These tiny sparks were meaningless to the casual observer, but to someone who knew what to look for, they suggested that the ship was not entirely lifeless. It still had life in it, waiting for care and attention, waiting for someone who could understand it. Despite the neglect, the Forsaken had resilience built into its very design. Its frame, though dented, was strong. Its engines, though cold, were modular and could be restored with patience. Hidden deep in its systems were features that modern ships sometimes lacked: backup navigation, reinforced hull sections, even secret compartments designed for safety and emergency use. All of this made the ship a puzzle of potential. But puzzles require someone willing to spend the time to understand them, someone willing to see value where everyone else saw only waste. Meanwhile, stories about the ship circulated among the older generation of mechanics and pilots. Some recalled seeing it race through asteroid fields with unmatched agility. Others remembered how it had been a lifeline during trade wars, carrying critical supplies when other ships were too slow or too fragile. Every story added a layer to its forgotten reputation, a silent reminder that this abandoned vessel had once mattered. These recollections were fading fast, however, replaced by tales of faster, newer ships and the belief that the past was irrelevant. And so, the Forsaken waited. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, months into years. Ships came and went, each with crews eager for adventure, trade, or profit. Dock workers continued their routines, cleaning, repairing, and inspecting new vessels, barely glancing at the neglected ship in the corner. Tourists or visitors might have passed by it, noting the rust and wear, perhaps snapping a picture for amusement, but no one ever considered that the ship could be anything more than a relic. The Forsaken was a shadow in the spaceport, quietly enduring time and neglect, its history slowly being erased from memory. Yet even in abandonment, there was a quiet dignity to the ship. Its design was strong and purposeful. Every dent, every scratch told a story of survival. The panels that had cracked in accidents still fit together in ways that hinted at the clever engineering of its original builders. Systems that looked dead often still had traces of power, whispering to those who could hear them. It was clear that this ship had been built not just to carry cargo, but to endure. To those who understood ships, it was more than scrap metal and rust. It was a testament to skill, innovation, and perseverance. And so the Forsaken remained, unnoticed by most, forgotten by nearly all, yet quietly holding on to the possibility of life once more. Waiting, always waiting, for someone who could see beyond the rust, beyond the dirt, beyond the years of neglect, to see the vessel for what it truly was. A survivor, a fighter, a ship with stories still to tell. In the heart of the crowded spaceport, surrounded by the bustle of the present, the Forsaken waited for its future. Elias Ford had been working in the spaceport for years, fixing engines, repairing panels, and maintaining the ships that came and went every day. He was not like the other mechanics who only cared about speed or the reputation of a ship. Elias had a curiosity that ran deeper than the engines and wiring he touched. He liked to understand how things worked, why they worked, and whether they could be made better. His hands were steady, his mind precise, and his patience unmatched. But more than anything, he loved stories, stories hidden in the tools, in the scratches on metal, in the hum of a functioning engine. One morning, as he walked past Dock 7 on his way to inspect a new freighter, his eyes fell on the Forsaken. It had been years since he had noticed it, but this time he paused. Something about the ship drew him in. It was not the shine or the speed of new ships that caught his attention. It was the history etched into its hull, the wear of long journeys, the silence that spoke louder than any engines could. Elias felt a tug in his chest, a whisper that maybe this ship was more than everyone said it was. Most of the mechanics laughed at him when he mentioned the ship. "Why bother with that old thing?" one had said, shaking his head. "It's broken beyond repair." Even if it worked again, who would want it? Others simply ignored him, focusing on the new arrivals, the shiny ships that gleamed under the artificial light of the port. But Elias could not ignore it. He saw potential where others saw waste. He saw strength where others saw decay. And most of all, he saw a story waiting to be told again. Elias spent that evening returning to the dock. The spaceport had quieted down, and the usual noise of engines and chatter was replaced by the soft hum of distant lights. He walked along the side of the Forsaken, running his fingers over the cold, rough metal. The surface was covered with rust, but beneath it, he could feel the shape of the original design, the smooth curves of the hull that had once been so proud. He knelt down to inspect the landing gear. Even in disrepair, it was sturdy. Even in neglect, it was functional. His mind raced with possibilities. He decided he would start small. He did not have the resources to rebuild the ship entirely, nor the authority to claim it as his own. But he could begin with observation, with understanding. He returned the next morning with a notebook, a flashlight, and basic tools. He climbed onto the side of the ship and began examining the exterior more carefully. Every panel, every access hatch, every scratch told a story. Some were clearly from accidents or long journeys. Others, subtle and careful, showed evidence of previous maintenance, perhaps done by hands that had cared as much as Elias did. Days turned into weeks as Elias returned to the Forsaken. He documented the condition of each system, the engines, the navigation controls, the communications array. He mapped out what was broken, what could be repaired, and what would need replacement. He discovered something remarkable. Many of the ship's internal systems, though old, were still operational or repairable. The ship was not dead, it was sleeping. Its potential was hidden but not gone. Elias began to dream of restoring it, of bringing it back to life, one small repair at a time. His dedication did not go unnoticed. A few of the older mechanics watched him work in silence, curious but skeptical. "He's wasting his time," one muttered to another. "That ship hasn't flown in decades. Nothing he does will change that." Yet others were quietly impressed by his determination. Even the dock workers, who had long ignored the forgotten ship, began to glance at it when Elias worked, whispering among themselves about what he might be doing. Some wondered if he had lost his mind, but others could not help but feel a spark of hope that perhaps, against all odds, the ship could fly again. Elias' work was slow and careful. He cleaned rusted panels, repaired wiring connections, and replaced broken switches wherever he could. Sometimes he worked alone, late into the night, using only a flashlight and his own tools. Other times, he convinced a few willing helpers to assist him, teaching them what he knew about the ship and its hidden systems. He spoke to them about the ship's history, sharing the stories he had learned from older sailors and mechanics. Each story made the ship feel more alive, more important. It was no longer just metal and circuits. It was a memory, a survivor, a vessel with a purpose. Elias also faced unexpected challenges. Some of the ship's systems were complicated in ways modern mechanics rarely saw. Certain controls were mechanical, others electronic, and a few were entirely unknown to him. Sometimes his attempts at repair failed, leaving him frustrated and tired, but he never gave up. He took breaks, studied the manuals he could find, and even sketched diagrams of the systems to understand them better. Each small success fueled his determination. Each failure taught him patience. Slowly, the impossible began to feel possible. Over time, a bond grew between Elias and the Forsaken. He began to talk to it, almost as if it were a living being. He gave names to the panels, to the engines, even to the small robots and drones he used to clean and inspect the ship. He imagined it remembering its past journeys, the crew it had carried, the storms it had survived. Sometimes, late at night, when he was working alone, he would whisper encouragement to it. "You can do this. We can do this together." The ship had been forgotten by everyone else, but not by him. In his care, it began to feel alive again. Word of Elias' project began to spread. Not everyone approved. Some saw it as foolish, a distraction from more important work. Others were concerned that tampering with such an old ship could be dangerous. But there were also those who quietly admired his courage. They could see the care he took, the knowledge he applied, and the hope he carried. Slowly, support began to build, though always quietly. No one offered large resources or authority, but small gestures, lending parts, sharing advice, opening access to equipment, made a difference. Elias learned to accept these small gifts and use them wisely. One morning, after weeks of careful inspection and minor repairs, Elias managed to power up one of the ship's auxiliary systems. A small panel lit up with green light, and a faint hum resonated through the hull. It was a minor success, but to Elias, it felt like a miracle. He smiled, running his hand over the control console. The ship responded, however, faintly to his touch. It was listening. It was awake. For the first time in years, the Forsaken was no longer just a forgotten relic. It had begun to move, to respond, to live again. This small breakthrough gave Elias new energy. He began planning larger repairs, thinking about how to restore the engines, how to clean the fuel lines, how to integrate modern technology with the old systems. Each day brought new discoveries. He learned which parts were original and which had been replaced in past repairs. He discovered hidden compartments designed for safety and storage. He uncovered manuals and logs left by the previous crew, learning from their mistakes and successes. Each discovery made the ship more alive in his mind, more valuable, more worthy of his time and effort. Elias also reflected on his own life as he worked. He thought of the mentors he had lost, the mistakes he had made, and the moments he had doubted himself. Working on the Forsaken was more than a technical project. It was personal. He saw in the ship a mirror of his own resilience, a chance to take something overlooked and make it strong again. The care he gave to it reflected the care he wished he had given to other parts of his life. In repairing the ship, he was repairing himself. Even as he worked, Elias never lost sight of the stories that had made the ship special. He imagined the lives of the crews who had once sailed it, the excitement of trade missions, the fear of storms and dangers, the camaraderie of a small team working together in confined quarters. He imagined the ship itself as a silent witness to these events, carrying memories in its hull and systems. By restoring the ship, he was also restoring those memories, keeping them alive for anyone who might care to listen. By the end of this first stage of work, the Forsaken had begun to change. Panels were cleaned, wiring reconnected, and minor systems were operational. The ship no longer seemed entirely abandoned. It seemed to hum with potential, waiting for the moment it could truly rise again. Dock workers began to notice the difference, sometimes pausing to glance at the ship with curiosity rather than mockery. Others whispered among themselves, questioning whether Elias might actually succeed where so many had given up. For the first time in decades, the Forsaken was not forgotten entirely. And through it all, Elias remained patient. He knew the work ahead was long, difficult, and uncertain. But he also knew that no ship or story was truly lost if someone was willing to care for it, to understand it, and to give it the attention it deserved. The Forsaken had survived neglect, abandonment, and the passage of time. Now, with Elias' hands and mind guiding it, it might just survive again, and perhaps in time become something greater than anyone could imagine. The weeks passed, and Elias Ford's work on the Forsaken had entered a new stage. No longer was he simply inspecting or cleaning the ship. He was now repairing, restoring, and slowly transforming it. Each day brought new tasks, each task a new challenge, and each challenge a new lesson. The spaceport continued its usual bustle around him, but Elias felt removed from it, as if the ship had created its own little world where only he and its secrets existed. He began with the engines, the heart of the ship. The original machinery was impressive, a combination of old engineering brilliance and hidden redundancy. Many mechanics would have dismissed it as outdated, too difficult to repair, or even unsafe to touch. But Elias saw the ingenuity in every bolt, every piston, every conduit. He carefully removed panels, studied the layout, and documented everything. The engines were clogged with rust, oil had dried into sticky clumps, and several control lines were frayed or disconnected. It would take time to get them running again, but Elias welcomed the challenge. Each repair required patience. He cleaned each component, polished the metal surfaces, and replaced worn-out parts with carefully chosen substitutes. Some parts he crafted himself, shaping metals with tools he had brought from his workshop. Others he scavenged from old ships that had been scrapped at the port. Sometimes he worked into the night, the light of his lantern flickering over the worn hull as he hummed softly, imagining the engines roaring to life once more. There were moments of frustration when a component would fail to fit or a connection would spark unexpectedly. But Elias learned to step back, breathe, and try again, letting his mind find solutions instead of forcing them. The ship's navigation system presented a different kind of challenge. Unlike the engines, it relied on precise circuits and delicate sensors. Many of the old circuits were corroded, and the data storage units had long stopped responding. Elias spent hours testing each connection, rewiring circuits, and even designing new circuits to integrate with the old ones. He discovered that the system was more sophisticated than modern designs in some ways, with hidden redundancies and automatic fail-safes that could protect the ship from accidents. It fascinated him. For every problem he solved, he felt a growing sense of respect for the original builders, and for every moment of failure he felt motivated to learn more. Meanwhile, the ship's interior was slowly coming back to life. Panels were polished, floors cleaned, and control consoles restored to working order. Elias found old manuals tucked into hidden compartments, yellowed with age but still legible. These manuals told the story of previous missions, the original design intentions, and even minor warnings about certain parts. They became a guide for Elias, helping him navigate the complex systems. Occasionally, he would discover personal notes left by the former crew, reminders to check certain systems, sketches, or diagrams, small pieces of a life lived aboard the ship. Each discovery made the Forsaken feel more alive, more human, and more deserving of care. As Elias worked, he developed routines. Mornings were for engine repair, afternoons for circuits and navigation, evenings for polishing and cleaning. He moved through the ship like a conductor with an orchestra, tuning each system, adjusting each mechanism, and listening to the subtle hums and vibrations. He spoke to the ship often, encouraging it, naming parts and celebrating small victories. "There, that's better," he would whisper when a circuit responded, or "Good work, old friend," when an engine pulley moved smoothly. It may have seemed strange to an outsider, but Elias felt a connection growing stronger with every hour he spent aboard. Challenges continued to emerge. Some systems had deteriorated more than he expected, while others required skills he had yet to master. He had to learn to integrate new technologies with the old, designing adapters, crafting new components, and even writing new code to help the ship operate efficiently. The process was slow, sometimes discouraging, but Elias never gave up. Each day he made progress, each small success bringing a sense of accomplishment that kept him motivated. He began to dream not just of restoring the ship, but of transforming it, making it stronger, faster, and more resilient than it had ever been. The dock workers began to notice the changes. They would pause during their routines to glance at the Forsaken, now gleaming in some areas, engines humming faintly, and lights flickering across the control panels. Some whispered among themselves, expressing curiosity, admiration, or doubt. Others secretly helped, lending parts, offering advice, or simply watching Elias work with silent encouragement. Even skeptics began to soften, realizing that this old, forgotten ship was being brought back to life by one man's vision and determination. Elias also spent time on the ship's outer hull. Rusted sections were sanded down, dents carefully hammered out, and weak points reinforced with strong alloys. He added a protective coating to prevent future corrosion and designed subtle modifications that would improve aerodynamics and structural stability. These improvements were small but meaningful, showing a thoughtful balance between preserving the original design and enhancing the ship for modern needs. It was not just restoration, it was evolution. One of the most important parts of the ship was its communication system. Long ignored and almost entirely disconnected, it had once allowed the crew to contact distant planets, relay messages, and coordinate trade routes. Elias studied the old transmitters and receivers, carefully rewiring them, integrating new signal boosters, and testing frequencies. Slowly, signals began to transmit. The ship, long silent, now had a voice again, faint at first, but undeniably present. For Elias, it was a thrilling confirmation that the Forsaken was no longer merely a relic. It was awakening. During this process, Elias also learned patience in unexpected ways. Not every repair worked on the first attempt. Sometimes his calculations were off, or the parts he had chosen did not fit perfectly. Occasionally, power surges caused minor setbacks, forcing him to start over. But with every failure, he grew wiser, more attentive, and more careful. He learned to observe, to anticipate, and to respect the complexities of the ship. The process became a dialogue between him and the Forsaken, each teaching the other something about resilience, strength, and possibility. As the weeks turned into months, the ship began to transform visibly. Where once there had been only rust and silence, there was now polished metal, functional systems, and lights glowing in harmony. The engines purred faintly, as if warming to life. Panels that had been cracked now fit neatly. Control consoles responded accurately to touch. Even small mechanical drones Elias had installed to help clean and inspect the ship seemed to move more confidently, as if sensing the change around them. The ship was no longer just a collection of metal and circuits. It was becoming a living, functioning entity. Elias also thought deeply about the ship's history. He imagined the journeys it had taken, the people it had carried, and the storms it had survived. He remembered stories he had heard from old sailors and mechanics, imagining the excitement, the fear, and the triumph of those missions. Each day of restoration felt like connecting with that past, honoring the work of those who had built and cared for the ship long ago. It was as much a tribute as it was a project. One evening, after an especially long day, Elias powered up the main engines for the first time in decades. The hum of energy, the vibration through the floor, and the faint warmth radiating from the machinery were overwhelming. He sat on a console, eyes wide, heart racing. The ship responded to his commands with smooth precision. It had begun to awaken fully. It was no longer the Forsaken. It was alive, aware, ready. Elias leaned back and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, feeling the culmination of months of patience, labor, and love. With the engines operational, he turned to the navigation systems. They responded more reliably now, integrating old systems with new adjustments he had made. Charts and star maps could be uploaded, and the ship was able to plot courses with remarkable precision. Communication systems were fully functional, allowing messages to be sent and received. The once-abandoned vessel was becoming a complete, self-sufficient ship capable of long journeys. Elias felt a sense of pride that was both personal and shared with the memory of the original crew. Even as the ship transformed, Elias remained grounded. He knew the process was not over. The ship still needed testing, fine-tuning, and adaptation to ensure safety and reliability. Yet, every challenge now felt manageable. Every system that responded correctly, every engine that hummed steadily, every console that lit up as intended was proof that his vision was being realized. He had taken a forgotten relic and was turning it into a vessel that could once again carry stories, adventures, and dreams. By the end of this stage, the Forsaken was no longer merely a ship cast aside. It was a symbol of patience, ingenuity, and hope. Its presence at Dock 7 was no longer ignored. Dock workers paused to admire it, mechanics asked questions about Elias' methods, and even skeptics could not deny the transformation. The ship that had once been forgotten now stood ready for a new chapter in its life. And through it all, Elias knew that the true transformation was not only in the ship, but in himself. He had discovered strengths he did not know he possessed: patience, creativity, resilience, and a deep sense of purpose. The Forsaken had given him the chance to reconnect with his own dreams and ambitions, to find meaning in persistence and care. In restoring the ship, he had restored a part of himself as well. The day finally came when Elias Ford knew that the Forsaken was ready for something more than quiet repairs at Dock 7. The ship, once abandoned and ignored, now gleamed with polished metal, functional systems, and engines humming with controlled power. Even the dullest panels reflected the light in subtle brilliance, and small indicator lights blinked with life across the consoles. It was as if the ship itself was aware that it was no longer a forgotten relic. Every cable, every component, every bolt had been tended to, tested, and restored. Elias walked along the deck, feeling the vibrations through the hull, and smiled. The ship had been patient for decades, and now, at last, it would move again. He began with a series of tests, cautious at first. The engines roared softly as he powered them up incrementally, monitoring pressure gauges, temperature sensors, and fuel flow. The ship responded precisely, smoothly, as if acknowledging his care and determination. Next, he tested the navigation systems, plotting small courses within the safety of the spaceport. Charts displayed accurately, coordinates aligned perfectly, and emergency systems responded instantly to simulated scenarios. Each successful test added confidence, but Elias knew that true proof would only come when the ship left the dock and soared into open space. Preparing for that moment took time. Elias checked every system multiple times: communication arrays, thrusters, life support, emergency power backups. He climbed through every hatch, inspected every panel, and tested every console. The ship had become more than a machine. It was a living puzzle of engineering, requiring attention and respect. Even small details mattered, lubricating hinges, calibrating sensors, and balancing fuel distribution. These were not glamorous tasks, but each step was essential. The Forsaken had been forgotten once, and Elias would not allow that to happen again. Word of the ship's restoration had begun to spread quietly through the spaceport. Dock workers, mechanics, and even a few traders paused to watch Elias work. Some offered parts or tools, others simply observed in silence. Skepticism had turned into curiosity, and curiosity into admiration. People whispered about the ship's sudden return to life, speculating whether Elias could truly make it fly again. But Elias paid little attention to the crowd. He focused only on the work, letting his hands and mind guide the transformation. The ship itself seemed to encourage him, responding with steady hums and lights that blinked in rhythm with his movements. Finally, the moment arrived. Elias initiated the first full-power test of the engines. The Forsaken shuddered slightly, as if stretching after years of stillness. Slowly, it rose from its moorings, held steady by the port's safety systems. Then, with careful adjustments, it began to move forward, gliding smoothly along the dock corridor. Elias felt a surge of pride and awe. The ship, once neglected and abandoned, now responded with grace and strength. He smiled and whispered to it, "You're ready, old friend. Let's show them what you can do." With safety protocols in place, Elias guided the ship out of the spaceport. The engines roared to life, carrying the ship smoothly into open space. Light reflected off its polished hull, making it shine like a star among stars. The Forsaken moved with confidence, turning and accelerating with remarkable precision. Elias tested its maneuverability, executing small rolls, turns, and ascents that the ship handled effortlessly. Every adjustment, every response, confirmed that his months of labor had not been in vain. The ship had not only survived, it had become stronger than anyone could have expected. As he piloted the ship, Elias reflected on its journey. This was a vessel that had been forgotten, dismissed, and abandoned, yet it had endured. Its structure had held up, its systems had survived neglect, and its design had proven remarkable. The ship had waited patiently for someone who could recognize its worth. Elias realized that restoring the ship had also restored his own sense of purpose. He had given life to something overlooked, and in doing so, had discovered strengths in himself he had never known. The next challenge came unexpectedly. A nearby cargo vessel reported mechanical failure, drifting helplessly near a hazardous asteroid belt. Authorities called for immediate assistance, warning that smaller rescue ships would struggle with the unstable debris. Elias hesitated for only a moment. The Forsaken had been restored, but this was a real test of its capabilities, and his own. Taking a deep breath, he plotted a course toward the distressed vessel, his hands steady on the controls. The ship responded instantly, engines powering up smoothly, navigation systems plotting a safe yet rapid trajectory. As he approached the cargo ship, Elias activated the communications array. The crew on board sounded relieved and frightened at the same time. "We're stuck near the belt," they said. "Please help us." Elias' calm voice came through clearly. "Hold tight, we're on our way. You'll be safe." He guided the Forsaken skillfully through the field of asteroids, using the ship's agility to avoid collisions while calculating the safest path. Each maneuver required precision and focus, and the ship responded flawlessly. Its strength, resilience, and speed made the impossible task achievable. Reaching the distressed vessel, Elias extended the Forsaken's mechanical arms and docking clamps. The ship's systems, restored and fine-tuned, performed perfectly. He carefully stabilized the cargo vessel, secured it to the Forsaken, and prepared to guide both safely back to the spaceport. The crew looked at him with gratitude and astonishment, whispering among themselves about the ship's power and reliability. For Elias, it was a quiet moment of triumph, not for glory, but for the satisfaction of seeing the ship he had restored save lives. As they returned to the port, news of the rescue spread quickly. Dock workers and authorities gathered to watch. The ship, once ignored and scorned, now glided into the dock with precision and power. People whispered in awe, recognizing the transformation. Skeptics who had doubted Elias' vision now nodded in respect. The Forsaken had proven its worth, not just as a machine, but as a living testament to patience, care, and human ingenuity. Elias guided the ship to its mooring, shutting down the engines carefully. The soft hum of power fading reminded him of all the work it had taken to reach this moment. He stepped out onto the dock, greeted by applause, cheers, and admiration from those who had once ignored the ship. He felt a wave of pride, not for himself, but for the vessel that had endured so much. The Forsaken had been given a second chance, and it had used it to demonstrate its strength and value. In the days that followed, the Forsaken became a symbol in the spaceport. Dock workers and mechanics would stop by to see the ship, now polished and fully operational. Students and young engineers came to learn from Elias, eager to understand the techniques and patience required to restore such a vessel. Traders and pilots took note, seeking to hire the ship for difficult missions, impressed by its reliability and resilience. What had once been a forgotten relic was now celebrated, a beacon of what could be achieved with care, knowledge, and determination. Elias continued to work with the ship, fine-tuning systems, teaching others, and preparing it for new adventures. He understood that restoration was not a single moment, but a continuous process. The Forsaken would continue to evolve, adapt, and grow stronger. And in turn, he had grown stronger, learning lessons in patience, persistence, and respect for the past. He had discovered that giving value to something forgotten could yield results beyond imagination, not only for the object itself, but for the person who dared to care. As he stood on the ship's bridge one evening, looking out at the stars stretching across the vastness of space, Elias felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The Forsaken hummed quietly beneath his feet, alive, ready, and powerful. It had endured neglect, abandonment, and doubt, yet it had risen again, stronger than before. He knew that more challenges would come, more missions to undertake, and more journeys to embark upon. But for the first time in years, he felt truly ready, because he had restored not just a ship, but a story, a legacy, and a dream. And so, the Forsaken, once cast aside by everyone, became a legend once again. It was no longer merely a vessel. It was a symbol of hope, patience, and perseverance. Its story, entwined with that of Elias Ford, reminded everyone who saw it that even the most neglected, forgotten things could rise again if given care, attention, and belief. The ship had survived its past, and now, with renewed power and purpose, it was ready to carry new stories, new journeys, and new dreams across the stars. Elias smiled one last time as he set a course for the horizon. The Forsaken's engines roared softly, steady and confident. Together, man and ship moved forward into the unknown, no longer forgotten, no longer abandoned, and full of promise. The spaceport behind them faded into the distance, and the stars ahead seemed to shine a little brighter, welcoming the return of a legend that had once been lost but was now alive again.